By train, by tram, by streetcar, and by bike, we're going to take a very multimodal trip around the heart of one of America's most misunderstood cities. All the things Portland, Oregon is doing right, and a couple things that are going slightly off the rails coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer-suggested topics, always welcome, and there are all kinds of interesting things I could talk about in Portland. And here's one that's been kind of gnawing at me. Maybe you have done this, but do one-way streets work? How many cities have gone back to two-way traffic? My city has gone back to two-way traffic downtown. Cheers. And I will talk about one-way streets and Portland's central city more broadly. The downtown grid in particular is really unique in the way it's laid out and the way it operates. And downtown Portland was in the national news a lot in the past couple of years, usually not in a way that was very flattering. So I wanted to check in on things and see for myself, so there's going to be some of that today too. First, let's define the central city of Portland. It's downtown, yeah, but it also includes close-in neighborhoods to the north, west, and south. And it also includes the central east side and the Albina and Lloyd districts on the other side of the Willamette. I'm not going to cover all of it today, but I do want to hit some highlights. First of all, let's check in on the Pearl. Kind of the poster child for the idea that you can take a formerly industrial brownfield site and catalyze dense development with a streetcar, and some creative financing. The Pearl started taking shape over 30 years ago, and redevelopment just keeps spreading to the northwest. It is kind of a bougie neighborhood, maybe slightly antiseptic, but it is home to a couple of my favorite things in the city. Northwest 13th, I just love the urban design. You can see that at some point it was basically a freight street. No sidewalks, really just a procession of loading docks. And note that vehicles are either prohibited or, if they're allowed at all, the design makes it very clear that they're to be considered guests. And Powell's City of Books. Just the best bookstore you can find in the US, hands down, and yes, I've been to the Strand, which is the only real competition. Okay, let's head down to the South Waterfront neighborhood for some more streetcar-oriented development. And let's just go right to the heart of the wildest, most weirdly multimodal spot in the whole city, maybe on the whole West Coast, right here at Moody and Gibbs. You've got the streetcar, and you've got the Portland Aerial Tram, which goes up to Oregon Health Sciences University, and you've got a lot of bikes. Like, a ton of bikes, because this is home to the Go By Bike Bike Valet, which claims to be the largest bike valet service in North America, and I'm not gonna doubt it. I think this is largely hospital staff parking their bikes and taking the tram up to OHSU, but Go By Bike parks over 100,000 bikes a year, and they've got a repair shop and loaner bikes, so this whole node just generates all kinds of interesting traffic. So your criticism of South Waterfront and the Pearl might be that they're a bit high-end, although there's more affordable housing in the Pearl than you might realize. But I think that means that more affluent people are taking up space in these nice new buildings instead of taking up the housing units that the next lower people on the economic ladder are in. I'm just a developer shill though, so what do I know? Okay, before we leave South Waterfront, let's touch on this other nominee for Portland's most multimodal location. I'm thinking of the Southwest Moody Transit Station, which has platforms that serve Max Light Rail, streetcar, and several bus lines, with a lot of bike and pedestrian traffic. But really, it's the whole Tillicum Crossing, which carries all those modes over the Willamette River, but no private motor vehicles. I kind of want to talk about FX2, TriMet's enhanced bus service that opened about a year ago. It is the big project that I was working on when I quit consulting and started this channel, but I think I'll save it for another video when I come back and talk about East Side neighborhoods. And of course, Max Light Rail, the transit system that really put Portland on the map. There's a whole history of freeway revolts in the early 1970s, and in Portland, they canceled the Mount Hood Freeway, which would have ripped apart several southeast neighborhoods, and they spent some of that money building rail transit instead. Probably the last time we ever got urbanists and NIMBYs on the same page. One last thing about the Tillicum. It's quiet, very pleasant to walk or bike over. Contrast the next bridge to the north, the Markham, which carries Interstate 5. I don't think nuisance is a strong enough word for this. So let's move on to the next bridge, the Hawthorne, which I think at one point was the busiest bike bridge on the continent, maybe 20 years ago. I had it at number 7 in a recent video, and it's just kind of an indication of how biking in Portland has really flatlined or even gone backwards while other cities have moved forward. I'll come back to this idea, but this was my commute the last 5 years I lived here. We're looking at the AM peak hour, and it's definitely nowhere near as busy as I'm used to. I imagine the pandemic and work from home haven't helped. Okay, I've been beating around the bush, so let's get to the heart of the question that people always ask. Well, at least on right-wing news television, which is Portland dead? Well, first, no. Is the central core, where all the office space is, as vibrant as it was before the pandemic? No, it's nowhere near that, but a lot of cities are struggling with this. Is downtown Portland a super fun place to be after like 10 p.m. on a weeknight? It could be better. I'm not a person who walks around taking pictures of people who are in distress, so this tent camp will have to get the point across. Housing affordability is hurting a lot of our cities right now, and the number of unhoused people is probably the most visible and sad indicator of that. So it is a bit of a vicious cycle. There's less activity downtown because a lot of the office space is empty, and fewer people come downtown because it's a less vibrant place. And it's a real shame because in a lot of ways, downtown Portland is as good as it gets from a design perspective. The blocks are small, like 250 feet by 250 feet, which makes the whole downtown very permeable in a way a lot of US cities' downtowns aren't. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the theory of downtown grids and why they're good, but if you're looking for that kind of discussion, might I recommend Alan Fisher's excellent Grid Cities Are Fine and OBF is a Copycat. So the blocks are small, there's great connectivity, and the public right-of-way is pretty well allocated. The sidewalks are mostly generous, and the streets are relatively narrow, usually just 1 or 2 lanes of traffic, so the pedestrian crossing distances are short. And the corners at downtown intersections are wide open with minimal clutter, and it helps that downtown Portland, for the most part, does not have beg buttons, which I will come back to. Okay, let's talk about a sensitive topic, which is that almost the entire downtown grid is made up of one-way streets. There's been a recent trend in urban planning to convert one-way streets to two-way operation, and I understand some of the arguments for that, but downtown Portland is sort of a case study of the benefits of a one-way grid. They're more predictable, they have fewer conflict points, and the signal cycle they require is much simpler than it is for two-way operation. It's just 2 phases, and that allows you to do some very cool things with signal progression. Like in most cities, you'll try to do signal coordination and progression that allows traffic to flow in the peak direction at whatever the posted speed is. In Portland, the entire downtown grid is coordinated so that you'll hit all the green lights if you're going about 12 miles an hour, which is great for bikes and acts almost like a traffic calming element. And if you hang out downtown long enough, you'll figure out that as a pedestrian, if you walk in the contraflow direction at a moderate pace, you'll hit the walk phase at all the signals. Note that because of the simplicity of the signals and the short length of the pedestrian crossings, you just don't need beg buttons. The walk signal always activates. I am glossing over this a bit because there is signal preemption for the MAX trains, which run both north-south and east-west on the grid, but this is getting wonky enough already. Suffice to say, the transit mall on 5th and 6th is kind of a goofy but pretty clever piece of engineering with trains and buses kind of dancing and hopscotching from stop to stop. Might even be worth a deep dive video at some point. So, my opinion, downtown Portland is still great, but the only thing that's missing is we just have to figure out how to bring people back and support the local businesses. Silver lining, shorter lunchtime lines at this place, if you know, you know. Sitting out in Pioneer Courthouse Square in the noon hour really brought back a lot of memories from when I was a downtown office worker myself. For years, my bike commute took me down Southwest Broadway, and the new protected bike lane that went in last year was something I was really excited to see. Not only because I spent years white-knuckling it in the door zone bike lane that used to be there, but it is a project that came out of Central City in Motion, a City of Portland effort that I'm extremely proud to have worked on. Was it super busy? No, but keep in mind, Portland State University at the south end of Broadway is a big driver of bike traffic, and classes weren't in yet, so it's all good. Well, unless... Breaking news, like 2 days after I left Portland, the Peabody director emailed staff and directed them to rip out the bike lane. Story's still evolving as I'm filming this, but pretty much everything we know about this is because Peabody staff aren't on board and leaked the whole thing to Jonathan at Bike Portland. And I know Jonathan doesn't always like to call himself a journalist, but if it wasn't for outlets like Bike Portland, you wouldn't even know half the stuff that's going on in our cities. Jonathan has run Bike Portland for like 18 years, and it's still as important as ever, so consider supporting it if you have the wherewithal. Anyway, Portland, I want to think the best of you, but this is extremely unserious behavior. I worked on this project. It took years of planning and outreach, millions of dollars of staff and consultant time just to get Central City in Motion adopted. Like, one of the big project drivers was there was no protected bike facility running north-south through downtown, and it took a whole bunch of analysis, countless meetings, and door-to-door outreach to get agreement that we were going to put that protected southbound facility on Southwest Broadway. And I know there were a lot of business owners who didn't like it, but when City Council adopted the plan, it was basically saying, we think trying to meet mode share targets and climate-related goals is more important than pretty minor inconveniences for a few businesses. Like, the hotels on Southwest Broadway have to put their valet on the far side of the protected bike lane. Well, you know what? When I stayed in Portland on this trip, I stayed in a hotel on Southwest Broadway. And I had to take an Uber there from the airport because the Airport Max line is under renovation. And guess what? It didn't even register to me that I had to cross a bike lane with my suitcase. It literally made no difference, and it has no impact on my likelihood of staying at that hotel again. What might impact the likelihood of staying at a hotel is whether the hotel owners are jerks or not. It's really pretty insane. Planners, who are usually pretty progressive-minded people by nature, are out here doing years of extensive community outreach to every impacted community. They're doing land acknowledgements and stuff, but if a rich business owner wants to take out a bike lane, they can just take a city council member out to a nice lunch or something. I can't even imagine how demoralizing this is for staff, and I know a lot of Peabody staff, and I feel for them. All I can say is try to remember why you got into planning and engineering in the first place. Okay, in a minute I'm going to get to another spot where the city has done something very cool and unique, which hopefully won't get de-implemented because some business owner got mad. But first, quick reminder to engage in all the usual ways, and your direct support really does help keep this channel running. So you can understand why planners often just stick to pretty basic incremental changes, and this is something the City of Portland staff has always done pretty well. Wands, cheap curb extensions, red paint, cheap bus islands. Why get invested when the new director can just send you an email telling you to rip everything out? Central City in Motion did have some other big structural changes though. A new two-way bike lane on NATO, the Ned Flanders Bridge over I-405 in Northwest Portland, the Blumenauer Bridge over I-84 in Inner Northeast. I mean, I really hope they're not going to come back and rip these out. Okay, one more bridge, the Burnside, another one of countless facilities that are designed to provide enough capacity to function well at peak hour, and then every other hour of the day it's just a bunch of empty space that encourages excessive speeding, and pedestrians have been killed on this bridge. So the idea here was to take the eastbound cross section, which was 3 general purpose lanes and a standard bike lane, buffer and delineate the bike lane, make the rightmost travel lane bus only, and narrow the other travel lanes. Simple enough, but the problem comes at the signal downstream where right-turning cars have to cross over, which is absolutely not a situation you want. I actually drew up this signal concept on my own time back in 2015. It keeps the right turns inside and then runs them as a separate phase. And look what finally got implemented this year. Turns out, when you're a traffic consultant working for the city, they actually pay attention to you. You know what though? I observed operations for a while, and it turns out that some drivers just don't appreciate innovation, and they're really just super mad they can't take a right turn on red. I mean, these people know they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing, right? Either that, or this is like an IQ test for drivers, and a bunch of them are like failing miserably. It's pretty sad. P-Bot's engineering staff are about as good as any in the US at designing treatments that ask drivers to slow down and pay more attention to their surroundings. While the traffic engineering you see in most US cities is designed around whatever the dumbest, least attentive possible driver will do. Well, maybe the dumbest, least attentive driver should not have a license to operate a 5,000-pound vehicle in the first place. So, I don't know, Portland. I guess at least the coffee is still good. It's nice to see coffee shops that are made out of old bus shelters are still doing good business. Coffee shops with good views of trains, still doing good business. And actually, I do have one last bridge I'm gonna talk about, but okay, if you follow me on the apps, you probably know I really like working in coffee shops. I like the buzz and the human activity, and something about being under the watchful eye of complete strangers and imagining they're judging me rather than completely ignoring me, which is much more likely. Well, it really helps keep me on task in a way that doesn't necessarily always happen if I'm working at home. But hooking up to random Wi-Fi networks can be a bit nerve-wracking, so that's where today's sponsor, NordVPN, comes in. I mean, it's not like I'm doing online banking or like filing my taxes while I'm out sipping a cortado. It's usually writing or editing, but I do get into my email and I do get into my YouTube account, and I'm always a bit paranoid about what kind of information I'm putting out on the local Wi-Fi. There are a lot of ways this kind of thing can go down, but here's a scenario that kind of keeps me awake at night. They call this a man-in-the-middle attack, and it probably is a man, but I don't know, hacking is equal opportunity. Anyway, they get you to log into a fake Wi-Fi hub with like the name of the coffee shop in it, and then all of a sudden they're intercepting everything you send. Not good. Well, if you're logged into NordVPN, which is just one click, that person in the middle is just going to see a bunch of gibberish because NordVPN gives you next-gen encryption. Not to mention, it's going to block malware and hackers. So, in other words, when I turn on my NordVPN connection, I feel like I can just focus on work and coffee. So this is why I'm recommending NordVPN so strongly. It is security, but it's really kind of a quality of life issue for me. I love working away from the distractions of home, and NordVPN lets me do that with confidence. Anyway, if you sign up for one of NordVPN's 2-year plans, you're gonna get 4 extra months on top if you use my code. Also, if you don't know, using a foreign country's IP address from inside the US can be a cool hack for booking international travel. Like, if you're booking hotels or car rentals, there's a lot of websites that'll just quote you a higher price if you're coming from a United States IP address. Just a tip for you international travelers. Anyway, NordVPN does come with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so it's really hard to go wrong here. Again, make sure you use the code down in the description. It gets you a much better deal, and it does help support the channel. And thanks again. Okay, one more bridge for you. One of my all-time favorite urban bridges. Carries cars, buses, and light rail on top, people walking and biking on the bottom, and the occasional coast starlight going down to California. Is the steel bridge as multimodal as the Tillicum crossing? Maybe. I think it's definitely cooler. You know what isn't cool? Having to show up like 40 minutes early for the Amtrak Cascades and then having to stand in line to get decent seats because there aren't any seat assignments. Maybe I'll talk about this more in the follow-up because I was headed up to Seattle for more filming. Okay, that is all I've got. Thanks for joining, and thanks to the patrons for continuing to make it possible for me to do these city visit trips. This one was a bit frustrating, but still enjoyable. I will take any opportunity I can get to come back to Portland. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.